Thank you for tuning in to the Boer Republic podcast. Today we've got an interesting podcast lined up for you, and our guest joining us today is Claude. On Twitter he's at GenMents, and we'll be debating aspects of anarchy. The debate will constitute a back and forth discussion regarding various aspects of anarchy, what works and what doesn't work. This is an interesting exchange of ideas that we've been looking forward to for a while, and this is something we'd like to continue with in the future. We'll also discuss what anarchy is. On that note, thank you for joining us today, Claude. It's great to have you on the show, and if you could just give the audience an idea of your work on Twitter, what you are interested in and what your approach is, also the various links where they can get a hold of you.
Well, my name is Claude, so you can find me on Twitter at GenMents, GenMentz. I've also got a YouTube channel where I discuss anarchy, what it's good for, what it's maybe not so good for, where it sucks sometimes. And on Twitter, I devote a lot of my time to just bashing the government, because I really don't like the South African government. I think they suck. So yeah, if you wanna talk to me, if you wanna fight with me, if you wanna praise me, or whatever, contact me on YouTube or watch my videos.
Okay, great. Tell the listeners what your stance would be in the debate, what sort of aspects you'll be tackling, your position on the matter.
Okay, so anarchy obviously is the life without a centralized ruler or any real authority that one person has over another. And one of the big issues is, in a world where we do have these institutions, where we do have authority over people, how do we achieve anarchy? My point would be that we need to drop the state as quickly as possible. We need to drop all authority as quickly as possible. And I propose one of two ways to do that. One that I think more people would be in favor of than the other. And that's segregation and war.
Nicely succinct. Then we'll tackle our position.
Right. Good. So from our side of the debate, where we are debating a slow, incremental move towards an anarchic society, mostly using political means, I'm basically going to try within 5 minutes, just base my opening statements around three basic arguments. And these arguments will focus on empirical evidence, as we see in the world today and in the past. It will be also based upon practical consequentialism, and also then on a philosophical basis. And then if you can rebut those or just make your opening statements. And firstly, right. I want to look at empirical evidence. And if I look at the world today as it stands, I can't find an anarchic society today unless you include places like Liberland, which is basically minarchistic. And saying that we can't really find a successful anarchic society today, that is empirical evidence that it has not been achieved through means of sudden anarchy in this word revolution. So generally what we've seen in the past historically is any attempted coups to overtake governments is generally done by other governments, and hence that usually just means it's replaced by another government. So if even you do succeed in collapsing, the evidence shows that generally a new government, or should we say a new empire, will take over and generally achieve dominance. And we've seen that recently in places like the Middle East and Libya and Syria. Again, these are very complicated cases, so that could be discussed another time. So let's also, because we don't see any anarchic societies today, if the argument is that someone was able to create an anarchic society through revolution, the fact that we don't see these societies around today is probably empirical evidence that they're not sustainable. Hence, probably best would be for a society to to move towards this in an incremental and slow trickling way. So basically, current empirical data that supports the slow trickle towards freedom is the way that people are generally voting in the moment. And we see these in recent current examples of places like England and the USA, as you would see with the emergence of Trump and, say, Brexit. So the argument is that, in a sense, people want to take these steps towards more freedom, which obviously, if these steps are just taken exponentially, it would end up in anarchy. As we can see with Brexit, we see people choosing to have less bureaucracy and less government, to peel away another layer of government. And the same, in a sense, if you could say that the Trump campaign was based on the idea of less regulations and bureaucracy, and people voted for it. So again, the argument can be made that their implementation has not been perfect. But my argument is that there is data that is the way that people want to move towards a freer society. They want to move in a slow, incremental way. So that is my first point, basically based on empirical evidence. So I'm going to move to the second point, which is from a sort of a practical, consequential standpoint. And I think this is probably the most obvious one that most people would bring up. And that is that if we want the best for the greatest amount of people, you want to give people the most time to adjust, because a quick revolution requires people to have a very high level of self-sustainability, which definitely is not the case today, as people are nowhere near that level of sustainability to survive in the case where the system collapses. So the idea is that we have to give people time to adapt. As we know, people are very adaptable, and slow incremental changes are generally what people are evolved for. And we even see this on sort of a biological level, where changes and mutations happen sort of one base pair at a time. So I think, especially if we apply to today in South Africa, sudden changes to the system will cause, I think, mass starvation, and definitely the type of chaos that is generally associated with the word of anarchy, which the mainstream uses, which we obviously disagree with, as we said at the beginning. And especially in a country like the one we're in, where there's a massive percentage of people who are on welfare of some sort, and where most people that are actually employed are employed by the government. So collapsing that system would probably create a lot of morbidity and maybe even mortality. So thirdly, I'm going to challenge that from a philosophical stance, and dare I say that a revolution is a immoral proposition. And as we've discussed, that anarchy and voluntarism runs very parallel to what we call the Nonaggression Principle, which is basically aggressing against someone violently against their will. And if you want to create an anarchic society, it's probably not very philosophically correct to bring about that society without using anarchic principles. So my argument is that you cannot really collapse the government, or shall I say, not according to my knowledge, by not aggressing against someone either in the government or, say, innocent citizens. And as the government in itself is a consensual entity through voting, you cannot really collapse, let's say, like the monetary system by at least aggressing against someone's property rights, which is the same as aggressing against the non-aggression principle. So my argument is, in a sense, that stance is philosophically immoral as per the definition of anarchy. And so I do suppose that the possibility, again, like an argument against this would be the possibility that this transition is completely peaceful by, if everyone on the internet hears our debates and listens to our channel, there can be a great amount of reverse brainwashing in one night, and tomorrow everyone peacefully goes into anarchy, which again is very unlikely. So I hope that kind of clears my sort of strongest 3 points. And Claude, over to you, maybe for your opening statements. If you want to attack either one of those welcome to go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I'll go in reverse order. Go through them. When you said if a revolution is immoral, I don't think a state will let its power be taken away any other way. Because like you can talk about democracy as a consensual system or a peaceful transition into anarchy, but you still need the government to understand that what they're doing, that which they think is right, isn't right. That it's unjust. That their authority cannot be just. And I don't know if there is any government that's going to willingly just give it up over any amount of time. At some point, they're going to kick their heels in and go, no. And then you do need a revolution. Then you do need to go, this needs to end right now. People need to start thinking for themselves. And there are situations where after a war in a society, it's usually chaotic for a while, but then people sort themselves out. And especially when you look at black markets in post-war societies, black markets flourish, not because these things are necessarily illegal, but it's the things that keep people happy. It's the things that keep people trying to create a better life for themselves. And in an anarchical society or during a revolution, there would be no law stopping this kind of trade, stopping people to do that black market scheme with anything. And that, I think, would drive certain people to stay away from, let's say, the front lines of the revolution and rather focus on providing for the people who are fighting the revolution against the government, preventing the total collapse of society. If we are to drop everything right now, I do think certain people will realize that, oh shit, we can't sustain this, because we've seen it fail time and time again if we send everybody to the front lines and leave no one on the farms or in the factories producing, because then there's nothing to fight with and there's nothing to eat in the end. So I think if we're smart about it, we can avoid the problem that revolution is going to leave everybody destitute, essentially. Then giving time for people to adjust. I don't. Well, that actually ties into what I said about the revolution. But there's one specific thing that I thought was we might be thinking about it wrong. You said that society evolves, and you made an appeal to biology. Now, biology evolves very, very slowly, but society evolves much more quickly. There's a faster change of ideas than there is a change in genes. So I don't think it's a good way to look at society as a biological organism necessarily. Or to look at evolution in society in that way. And then the empirical evidence, the only rebuttal that I have is, why would you play the government's game? Why would you slowly, through a government-led, because I don't think the government would put this power in the hands of anybody else. Why would you go through a government-led program to dissolve the government? Why would you allow them to do that? The idea is to take the power away from the government. If you put it in their hands, you're still giving them authority over you in some way. How can you legitimize the government to do this, and how can you trust them? How can you trust them to do what they say they're going to do? Because that's what's happening right now. Massive people are trusting the government to do what they say they're going to do, and then almost 90% of it never gets done. So why would we trust them with this? Why not try to learn from the mistakes that we made in the past with revolutions and plan for them, plan to stop them in some way, instead of giving it to the government like we have with every single problem? That would be my counter argument.
Right, good. No, perfect. Right. So let me go through what you said about. Let's go to the philosophical argument that we had there, and what you said is that you say it is not immoral because the state won't allow that. Now, allow me to dare say I don't see how that is a philosophical argument against it being immoral. The act of revolution will still be immoral unless you can tell me that you can cause a revolution without aggressing against the non-aggression principle, unless you feel that creating a revolution is within the moral means of the process.
Well,
in a way, sorry, let me just sorry, I interrupt you there, but just saying that the state won't allow us to take it away is kind of saying so. It is, should I say, kind of repeating the point, because we know that is definitely going to happen. It's the same as, you need to do self-defense because the other person is still going to try and kill you. It doesn't mean you don't have to transgress against it, meaning that the government we know that the government is not going to allow you to do that. They are going to fight back, as that is their only means of living.
Well, if we were to just start disregarding the authority, let's say we just don't do what the police tell us, everyone starts stealing in a sense, or stealing in the true sense, everyone just starts doing what they want. There's no drive to bring the government down. The government's going to pick up on it. So if we just start living as an anarchical society and we forget about the government's going to come pester us. The government is going to have a problem with that, and the government will break the non-aggression principle. I'm not saying we have to break the non-aggression principle, because revolution doesn't necessarily mean violent revolution. It just means change. It means the turning of the wheel.
Okay. No, I get you. Yeah. No, I understand that. And again, yeah, in that case, as I said in the end of that argument, if you're able to produce revolution that way, I agree with you. Then you're correct. Then you can result in a revolution in a moral sense. Correct. I think again there I would say evidence is on my side of the argument in a sense that we know, as I said, you would have to de-brainwash this whole population tonight to basically make a stand in that sense where it'll be successful, because if just 12 of us do that, we will be killed quite quickly. We will be taken out of the system very quickly. The only recent example we've seen in this country is the whole population stood against the e-tolls. It's a new tax, which just means it's a government tried to enforce another law, and everyone just said no, and it was successful. You could say that was the greatest example of a mini revolution in this country actually working.
Does e-toll still exist?
Well, yes, if you own some kind of taxi business, but it does not exist on my payroll now.
I'm asking because my brother and my father and many other people who have to drive on the road between Joburg and Pretoria, they all have e-tags, but it's supplied to them by their job, so they don't really pay for it. They get to claim it back, but the businesses still support e-toll. So e-toll technically won through capitalism.
Sure.
Just to clarify, perhaps on that point, though, and it's quite true that there was a success in protesting the e-toll, but if you go onto any site that discusses the e-toll, you get this sort of half-assed option to pay or not to pay, and then the decision on whether or not to pay e-tolls is up to you. You must decide this bearing in mind the consequences if you do not pay. So immediately it ties into your point, Claude, where the government will come pester you. Just to clarify on that point, and there's another aspect to it, is if, for instance, there are e-toll gantries and it scans your license and things like that as you go through. And if you undergo if you go through the gantries and you don't pay, you end up receiving invoices in the post. I think there is an aspect of it that still exists, and I think it's in the much larger places like Johannesburg, things like that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I must say, okay, so if we go on my third point and you counter that you are able to start a revolution in that way, then I'll concede that point, that it is definitely possible to start a revolution. Although I think the footnote will still be that we are still have to see that feasibly happening in today's world as it happened with e-tolls. So if I go to just to counter what you said about the point about evolution and biology, and a lot what you said there is correct, that society definitely does change quicker than biology, and we see that obviously with cell phones and just what it does to the brain. So, but I will counter that in a way of saying that there is, although that is definitely examples for both, there is long-standing what we would call memes, to define that as kind of ideological ideas that get passed through generations, as if it gets passed through humans. Is that something like religion still exists, and it has existed for an extremely long time now? That is definitely a societal culture created entity, and you could say that statism, or the belief in government, or that you need a government, is a type of religion that has existed for extremely long time. So that is kind of a counter against that. These things do change very quickly. These things that have been around for thousands of years, and to change things that are so deeply incorporated into the human psyche, my argument is that is quite difficult to do.
I would say that yes, I do agree that things like religion and the state and authority are very deeply ingrained in the human psyche. But that doesn't mean we should not strive for the ultimate ideal now. We should make peace with the fact that we can't necessarily achieve everything we want to right now. But it doesn't mean we need to look at it as a very long-term thing necessarily. And I want to maybe change my point a little, because I do agree with you that a revolution tomorrow might be unfeasible. I don't think it's going to work. But can we change the definition to a revolution that happens immediately or instantaneously? There's a build-up, there's planning, there's whatever, and then suddenly everything comes crashing down. The government buildings get set alight.
Sure. Yeah. No. That's in keeping with even the definition at the beginning. It's a very short-term thing, whether it's instantaneous or across a few days. Sure.
Okay. Right. So if we could organize people, that we put certain strengths with certain weaknesses. We get everybody together on, let's say, an online forum where communication is easy, where you can communicate across vast distances, and people discuss how they're going to do what, who is responsible for, let's say, production of food, production of whatever, and then you just start the revolution at some point. You on one day, like with the Arab Spring, everybody just shows up on the streets at a certain time and creates enough chaos for the government to just leave the situation alone.
Sure.
They'll send in the army, but the army won't do anything because the government's killing its own people. They can't take that moral risk. So I think enforce the government into a situation where they cannot do anything against us, where there is just too many people disagreeing with them at one point in time.
Okay. No, I see your point. Yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna I'm going to counter that to what you talked about the Arab Spring, and I'm bringing it back to kind of looking for if there's any empirical evidence of this having any chance of working. I think theoretically what you're saying is absolutely great, but we do live in the real world today, and the question of creating this, I think most anarchists would want to do this and are probably trying to do this, and there's obviously reasons why we're not successful. And if we look at the Arab Spring, one thing that I'll counter that with is it looked like a lot of people, but in context to the population, it's a very small group of people which technically overturned the government on that night. And you could say, where are they politically at the moment? Well, they've got another powerful government. I think I'm not. Again, you have to fact check me here. I think it's the Muslim.
No. The Arab Spring turned out to be a dismal failure, but I was proving the point that you could overturn a government with a lot of people in one space.
Sure, I agree with that. But again, then my argument is that's not a good idea, because every time it has happened, it has resulted in probably more depressive and more oppressive government. And so if we take an example, and again, something more close to home and probably even more current, is like the state of Zimbabwe. They basically have been overthrown. They're kind of without, I wouldn't say they're without government, but they're supposedly having hashtag democratic elections in the next few months. There is also, that was a perfect breeding ground to start an anarchic society. And it's not that the Zimbabwean people don't want to be free. It's not that they're not smart. We know them because a lot of them come here. We know their work ethic. And again, all we're going to see, and what we've seen so far, is just another government taking over. So, how I counter that is, yes, anytime when there's a revolution happens with a small group of people. Once, so far, it always results in stronger and worse governments. I won't say worse, you could just say governments again. And you could take even an example of Romania at the end of communism, where the president was actually shot by a group of people after they started booing his speech, and that is an amazing sign to see how weak the government actually is, or the people in the government, and still that has not resulted in a free country. So, in a sense, I think my argument is you kind of have to provide empirical evidence as to how this has actually worked out in any society, past or present.
There have been societies that the government has just left alone. There is I forget the name now.
Hamish.
No, Kristiania, in Norway, I think. It used to be, if I remember correctly, it used to be a military base that the government stopped using, and a bunch of hippies and prostitutes and anybody who wasn't loved by the government just sort of moved in there. And initially the government wanted to shut it down immediately, but the rest of the world went, no, just let them be, just leave them alone for a while. And this project ran for quite a few years. It started somewhere in the 70s, and it only got ended, or semi-ended, in 2011 or 2013, I think.
Okay. As the prostitutes aged to a point where no one required their services. Sorry, go on.
But this society was sort of structured around the taboo, drugs and prostitutes and murderers, and it wasn't necessarily a very nice place to live, because the rest of the country didn't like them, but they were effectively independent. They had their own economy, their own way of doing things, and their economy, I think, functioned without money. It was more of I made some drugs. Do you want some drugs? Okay, cool. I want sex or whatever. There was a bit more of a bartering system in place, and it worked really well until the government shut it down. Now it's just a safe haven for you to sell weed and shrooms. I think those are the only two illegal drugs they still allow you to sell there. But that worked very beautifully until, and it was just a bunch of people who went there without the idea to kill anybody or whatever. That they just claimed the military base for themselves, and they lived there. And for as long as the government didn't do anything, there weren't really any problems.
Okay. No, okay. I must say I've not heard of that. And I mean, there's other examples you could say around the world. You could say, in a sense, it's the Amish communities like that. You could say Urania to a certain effect like that. The best example, I think, that I have the most hope for is a place like Liberland, which is somewhere also in East Europe, where they've actually cordoned off an area close to Serbia. And technically, they are a monarchistic society, but it is a free reign anarcho-capitalist society where the only taxes is paid to border patrols, and otherwise there is not one regulation in the whole country, which sounds like paradise. But yet again, the fact that, and you can apply for citizenship, I'm still yet awaiting that visa. But again, my point is, and that, that society, as you spoke about, in Norway does not exist. And again, I think these examples point to whenever a government seems threatened or feels threatened, in a sense, they will destroy societies like that. And hence, that's why something like the Amish is a great society, and probably the best example I could think of something that's successful. But it's because they technically are harmless. They're not making a lot of money for the government. They've got nothing really to steal there. Unless they want.
They're self-sufficient to a large extent.
Yeah. And hence that kind of falls into my argument that, both of our arguments say that you have to destroy the government in some way. But hence, if you're going to leave that entity and you're going to create your own little spot, you are never going to become more powerful than the government. So it's kind of like you have to kill your enemy. You can't kill it from leaving it alone. You have to kill it from within. And hence that's why my argument is you kind of have to, it's like if you have a business and you have your competition is across the street. You either create an amazing business here, or you just get one guy to go in there, becomes sort of to infiltrate the business and kill it from within. Hence, that is what governments have done to each other over the years. They infiltrate and they destroy. That's what most political parties do. And hence, the idea is to use their own medicine against themselves. So that is kind of that argument from my side.
I think taking a cue from societies like Christiania or Liberland, you need to factor in that what if some people do want to live under a government? I mean, if everybody's free to make their own choices, I don't see how you could force anybody into an anarchical society without disregarding their freedom of choice or their liberties. So the only way to have both a moral revolution and to effect a anarchic society would be to like camp off a piece of land and defend it at all costs, and make the point clear to the government that you're not there to dissolve them necessarily, just that you want your own little society, which would then draw people in if it is truly better. Like if you do it right, if you can do quote unquote like true anarchy or pure anarchy or whatever, and it works better, then people will leave the government. You will kill the government from the inside, not by killing the government actively, but by stealing its populace.
Sure. Okay.
So you need to start somewhere. You can't implement it on a national scale. It'll work. That's probably why most of the revolutions have failed. It's because they were implemented on too big a scale.
Okay, I'm going to use a very possibly an offensive analogy to the picture you've painted now. There's a lot of anarchic Asian photographers that always get out of the how should I say, the wildlife safari truck to take a picture of a lion, but seemingly the lion always attacks them. To try and start a little community next to a government and tell them we're not here to attack you. It is basically like asking a lion to sit still for a selfie. He's going to attack you in his wild environment. So I hear what you say there, and again, let me throw another light on that about where you said about humans being very adaptable, and I agree to you in a sense, in that humans are very adaptable. We've seen humans going through concentration camps, and adaptable is probably the word. It's very you still break a human psyche like that.
Yeah.
So let's take the example of if you bring about revolution, people are amazingly adaptable to go from statists to complete free human beings, but the other side exists as well, in that you can go from a statist type of citizen where you are bound by certain laws which are quite well enforced. You could go the other way and you can become an extremely evil person that can get your hand on nuclear weapons, depending on which country it is. I know we were talking about our country, but let's just use this for an example. We overthrow America, and some two or three guys gain control of the nukes. As you could say, if a guy like Hitler gains control of a whole military, it is a problem for the rest of the world. So my argument is against rapid revolutions like that, based on your argument of human adaptability, in that the adaptability can go the other way. And what we have then is a person with a button in his hand to bring about nuclear war, which surely will end the world and the environment. And let's take the example as well of someone like Hitler. It took governments to bring Hitler down, not an anarchic society. So rather a slow progression of all governments internally towards anarchy than a quick revolution, because it might end up in nuclear war. I know that's a big stretch. I'm sorry for that long one, but what do you think of that?
Just to interject there, just regarding the big stretches. Even if Hitler nuked everyone, he would still do nothing wrong. Anyway, continue.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. So nukes is one of the big problems for me, or any big weapon really. Like even a tank. I'm not exactly sure what to do about something like a tank. What if you put a tank in the wrong hands? But I would say if you plan for things like this, if you get a group of people together who think out what can go wrong, you almost call them the warriors, in the sense that they worry about everything that can go wrong, and you plan for these things. You say, okay, there are nukes, we need to deal with them, and most of those nukes aren't armed, so I'm pretty sure you can take them apart. I'm not an expert on nukes, but I'm pretty sure there is a way to safely take them apart so that they are inactive. And you need the nuclear codes before you can do anything about them, or anything with them. So if you can plan to disarm them, then you can take care of the nukes. You can forget about the nukes, and they don't fall into the wrong hands. The army, however, during a lot of revolutions, the army becomes split because there are some people in the army who like one side, and there are other people in the army who like the side they were originally on. So you've got two armies. I don't think anybody will ever gain complete control over the army in that sense. It'll either create its own army before the revolution, or it'll kill the half of the army that doesn't like it, or that doesn't accept its authority, or it's not authority. Then that'll be a hole in my boat.
Sure. All right. No, I would agree with you, and I mean this is a very, very complex technical point around this debate. Is this question of militaries and nuclear bombs, and I would agree 100% with you if we were talking if we had this debate, if the internet existed in the pre-tank era, somewhere in the 1700s, where there was no military strong enough to destroy the world, then this argument would be easy, because there's no big threat to a different continent. But because, and you could say the same, if we all started with an anarchic society, I don't think anyone is going to build tanks. You can't create a military, because the only way a military is created is by the centralized financial system that we have. Only centralized banks with, with the Fed and things like that, where they can print money from nothing. Only they can create militaries. And if in an anarchic society, it'll never happen that someone is going to be able to build a tank next door to me and start pointing it to me. It's very difficult to build a tank on your own. It's difficult to build a pencil on your own, which has been shown that you need a really large amount of people to build a good pencil. No way that companies are going to get together and help a guy build a tank in an anarchic society, you could say. So my argument is that because today gives us a different place, where if you attack Iran or whatever and you overthrow it and you discover they do actually have nukes and it gets into the wrong hands, and someone bombs another country for another false flag attack, and you have China that bombs US bombs China, the world ends based on us getting this argument wrong. So in today's era, I think my argument is safer in a sense that you first need to take care of these things. You first need certain empires, and kind of winking towards the US, you need these empires to fall, which they will through bankruptcy, as they create money out of nothing, and hence we all start buying Bitcoin. And once they fall and their militaries fall, then there could be a disarmament of the nukes, and hence this argument could come up. But I think in today's world, it is definitely a better idea to first work with governments to destroy these systems before you start a revolution.
But work with governments to destroy the systems. Why would the government willingly destroy the systems that give them so much power?
Sure, I don't always mean, when I say, like I said, you can destroy them from within. They're the same propaganda and brainwash that the government uses on its citizens every day. You can just use it against them. You can destroy them with their own poison. And I mean, I'm not saying that in my point, it doesn't mean I have to do it wonderfully and ethically, slowly bring the government to a halt. I could change things as well from within and in a moral way, because for the government to exist, they create an immoral environment anyway. So it's the same as you saying, I murdered that guy when he attacked me. It's self-defense. Any battle I go against the government, even incrementally from inside, is the same as self-defense. So there is no moral issue even there.
Okay. I am willing to concede your point that a revolution might not be the best way to do it. But I do have one question. So what would the action be on the individual to do this? What do people have to do to get the ball rolling, to start this process on slowly dissolving a government?
Well, that's a brilliant question, and I appreciate you conceding there. That's a great plug for our previous podcast, because we basically went through the first steps of getting to this scenario, especially in today's age, which, as we've just discussed, it's extremely difficult and a complex topic. I would say that, just to summarize our previous podcast, which you can find in the links below, is that you first have to create a parallel economic system. And we see that happening today, as you talked about, black markets, things like Silk Road, and these entities. If you can create a parallel economic system, which is where your freedoms as an individual is protected by technology, government can do a lot of things, but they can't change mathematics. So if once this is created and the economy moves into a decentralized manner to where the power is with the individual, you will see governments going bankrupt. And if governments are bankrupt, then there's not much that they can do. It's the same as if they can't tax you, well, they have a limited ability to control you. So the first step is, because most things government do is for economic reasons, correct?
Yes.
So I would, to the listenership, say that is the first thing you should do, is you should economically free yourself from a coercive government. Once you've done that, the rest generally falls in place, where you practice self-sufficient practices of with regards to energy, with regards to food, and then thirdly, the most important thing is build community, because a process like this is extremely difficult, and you make one wrong step, or someone, God forbid, puts a tax on the sun where you have to pay for your solar panel. I don't see that ever happening. Not.
Oh yeah, and I wouldn't be so sure.
No, I know that was. I know it's happening. So in a sense, you're always going to get the one guy who does this correctly, but the government's going to come after him. And in that time, you need friends, you need community, and that is exactly what we're doing here. And what we encourage all our listeners to do is, you have to start today of building up your community, because in the end, you can only trust the people around you, because the way the government creates a system is where we live in a very lonely, individualistic place, where each man for himself. If you're unable to pay your parking tickets and you come running to me and they're going to jail you, very few people is going to allow some criminal to live in their house.
Yeah.
And although you didn't really transgress against anyone, surely. So for me, to summarize it, it's basically you create economic freedom, and hence you get sustainability, and you work on community, as exactly what we're doing here.
Okay. And then so establishing a separate economic system, that's great for the people who already actively participate in the current one, but what about the poorer communities in South Africa specifically? How would they go about, because they don't have access to things like Bitcoin or any other separate economy other than the South African economy? They might have some small economies among themselves, but that's not big enough to conquer the South African economy, the national economy. So how would they then go about it? Because that's one thing that's really big for me. It's how do I change the lives of the poorest people in the country? Because I grew up with a pretty cushy life, but I've always seen people in really bad circumstances, and I want to help them empower themselves.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and again, that is it's again an incredibly complex and difficult question, and something that I think needs at least an hour or two podcasts to go through. But I'll make these few points. And the first and most important thing to know is that the greatest harm is done to the poor by government themselves. So the greatest gift you can give the poor is free them from the government. You could just see today there's the debates about minimum wage. Now that it destroys the lives of a lot of poor, where now suddenly they lose their jobs. Why? Because some guy with a suit somewhere wrote something on a piece of paper. Whereby there is people who's willing, if you're willing to work 12 hours and make it, and you can still support your children, and and that's the only job you can get, then the government takes that away from you. So there's been a lot more harm done. The death count from government is incredible as compared to a capitalistic system, which gave you your cushy life and gave us our lives and what we're using today to talk to each other. And it's the idea that a rising tide, lifts up all boats. And you could see, if you look at statistics, studies that they've done with Wi-Fi in certain poor areas, just by giving a community free Wi-Fi, they can increase their GDP by about 10% a year. And this is the poorest of the poor. And that's all technology. That is something that the government didn't create. It is in a sense, a capitalistic system where that is the way to improve their lives. The way you improve it is by taking away regulations. The fact that someone wants to become a taxi driver, but he has to get 12 licenses to do that. Yeah. And you get a guy who someone created an Uber app, and then this guy just jumps into a car, and now these guys make, if you're a good Uber driver, you make actually a good salary. I'm sorry for the skills needed just to drive. You can make that salary because of the decreasing government regulations. So I see it, and as we see it here at Boer Republic, is the way that we help the poor is going after the greatest evil. And what can I do? I can't help. Again, a lot of the poor make bad decisions. A lot of them choose drugs. A lot of them choose crime, and that you can't change that. The only thing you can do is you can equalize the opportunity, and you equalize that opportunity by taking out, the greatest roadblock to freedom. And that's all I think you can do. You focus on that, and the rest, that may the chips fall where they may. Is only so much you can do to help a person. I don't know if you've ever tried to actually help someone. It is incredibly difficult to help someone out of a position, even if it's a family member, a good friend, and you try to get him out of an addiction, try to change his personality so that he's employable, try to get him to think for himself. It is, I don't have a lot of life experience, but I definitely have that it is very, very difficult. And to change someone you don't know, no.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. No. Yeah,
I think that's good. I think it's a good time.
So, Claude, as we wind down this discussion, and that was a very good note to end on. As we wind down, can you perhaps just tell the listeners a bit more about your plans for your project, your side of things? What does the future hold in store for you?
Well, at the moment, I've got a lot of exams coming up, so I don't know how active I'm going to be on my YouTube channel or on Twitter. I've got a lot of studying to do. But for the rest, I am planning to get involved with an organization called Africans Rising. They're not anarchistic per se, but if you go check out their website, you can see that they're out in the poorest Africa, looking after those people, and I really think they're doing a good job, much better than the UN. So yeah, I focus primarily on problems in and around Africa, so not necessarily international politics. Yeah, I'm planning to in the holidays after my exams now do a whole sort of history of anarchy in Africa series, where I look at different African cultures and how they might be called anarchistic because they weren't, like all the literature I'm looking at just called them heathens or tribalists or whatever. But I think they do have some core African concepts that translate into anarchy, and I will probably be looking at a lot of that after the exams, which should be in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, great. We'd very much like to have you on the show again. We'd very much like to discuss, and I think this topic is something that is too large to just unravel in a quick debate like this. So we definitely like to tackle a few topics with you again. Go through a few thought experiments, that sort of thing, in the future. And if you're keen, we'd love to have you back on again.
Oh yeah, no, I would really appreciate being back here. I would love it. Thank you.
No, thanks for being on the show. Any final words or any final thoughts from either of you?
Yes, no, I'd just like to thank Claude for the little brain battle we had. That was very exciting, very good to hear the other points. I think there's still a lot to debate about, and looking forward to future discussions and future debates. And we just want to say we will go through all the comments and try and answer as much as we can from all the listeners. Please send us your thoughts, your comments, your ideas, and hope to hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the Boer Republic podcast. It is our hope that this podcast informs and inspires. Please follow us and subscribe on all our social media pages. The various links can be found in the description below. Media content will be uploaded often and social media updated regularly. If our message resonates with you, please consider supporting us via cryptocurrency. We strive to bring you as much content as we can, and your support makes that possible. Thank you once again for taking the time to listen to this podcast. We hope that it leads you to new avenues of research and knowledge. And as always, stay safe and remain hopeful for your future, wherever you may find yourself.